are based on these data, and then the city is kind of keeping some of these up to date as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Would you have been able to do something like this if you didn't have Quicken Loans back?
That is a good question.
Could you repeat the question?
So I can repeat the question. Would we have been able to do this without Quicken Loans backing? What's that?
I want to answer too.
Oh, well, you first then.
Well, I mean, there's examples of this work. So this is a grand scale.
Can you
of
stand up,
380,000.
Kathy, so we can hear you,
Oh,
and
sorry.
just introduce
This is
yourself?
a grand scale of 380,000 properties. This always happens at NIP Partners. You're like, well, what if I don't have Erica? What if I don't have Dan Gilbert? What do I do? But there's great examples in Camden and Pittsburgh and other places that have done this kind of work at different scales, maybe not as many questions or not as fast, or doing more volunteers instead of payment, but anyway, so don't be discouraged if you don't have it.
Yeah. I'll add too, so one of the, I mentioned that we hired the residents, right? We paid because we know that your time is valuable. I get paid for this work. I wouldn't be doing it for free every day, all day, right? So one of the interesting things, trying to sort of spur on, we thought like, oh, we'll just put this app out and like everyone will just use it, right? No. So we followed on this project with a small mini grant program to work directly with community organizations. So sort of that, you know, we're, just as Kathy was explaining earlier, like the national network, then the NIP partners are kind of conduits to communities. In our local community, we leverage the community organization sort of grassroots engagement to be the conduit to residents, because I can't meet 717,000 people, right? But we did a mini grant program, very small amount of funds, and a little bit of training, tiny little bit of training, and people were excited to go out and do that, not for hourly pay, but rather for the community sort of conversation that could erupt from that, and also just even food and coffee, right? Just keep me warm. So there are other ways to go about doing it, much more creative. We just happen to have the resources for this one.
Of course, this data was shared with governmental and legislative, for the sake of policies being created. How much was it shared with the private sector in regards to industry, as per our discussion yesterday, like the automotive industry, because we know that's what Detroit was basically built on. How much was this shared with them?
So the resulting...
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, thank you. So how much was this shared with the corporate sector? Is that...
Well, basically, what made Detroit Detroit, the automotive industry.
Yeah. Okay, so how much was this shared with the automotive industry? What made Detroit Detroit? I will say that my focus is on residents for the most part. We made the data public. Like I said, anyone can go and utilize it. Anyone can go and download it, interact with it, play on the website, whatever. So it's probably a very important question to ask, but I've been so focused on making sure that community groups can actually utilize the information and benefit from it, and just kind of guessing that our corporate partners locally would have the resources to do that on their own. But it's a good point, and I should think more about that. Yeah.
Have you ever correlated this data with HMDA data, which is the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, to sort of back engineer who are the lenders and to see if that was a predatory problem?
So we have a bit of a challenge in Detroit. We don't have a lot of mortgages in Detroit anymore. Like starting in the early 2000s, we don't have a lot of mortgages in Detroit. So the HMDA data are not capturing a lot. So 380,000 parcels. In 2014, we have fewer than 400 mortgages.
Really?
400. So it's not going to tell us a whole lot at this point about the market activity that's happening.
Could you repeat that?
I am so sorry. I got to get practiced at that. Okay, so the question was around HMDA data, the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data, which requires, is everyone familiar with HMDA? Yeah, okay. So the problem for Detroit is that we don't have a lot of mortgage transactions occurring. So the information that we get out of that is less than useful.
And the
Yeah.
stats, could you repeat the stats to the 380,000 parcels and?
Yes, so we have 380,000 parcels in Detroit, as we've mentioned. In 2014, there were fewer than 400 mortgages in the entire city. I am dead serious. So you'll notice on the listing of the databases, I mentioned the Register of Deeds data, which is our county Register of Deeds where all of the changes are supposed to be recorded. What we found that was the first time we were able to get those data out because of all the political leverage that was happening around this crazy task force thing with a billionaire and everybody else at the table. So we were able to buy that data for what I would term an exorbitant amount of money. It was fairly unreasonable, but we got it, and we were able to see that there were many more cash transactions than we had supposed. And so we're continuing to explore what that means for Detroit and what we can glean from the data that will actually be useful. Ooh, there's lots of questions on that one. All right. Okay. I can't remember who was first. Go ahead. Oh, he's gonna shout.
Yeah, I'm struck by the fact that you analyze the data by identifying what you consider to be optimum investments, the best place to go into a neighborhood. On the other hand, that meant that some neighborhoods, and I would presume some of the neighborhoods that were in worse shape, were being left out of the picture. So what kinds of conversations were you having with neighborhoods that felt they were being abandoned by that policy choice?
Yeah. Did everyone hear it over there?
Yes.
Okay. Good job. Okay, so in Detroit for 60 years, we have been avoiding the difficult choices that need to be made when you have limited resources available. And we have been sprinkling a very limited pool of resources across the entire community, and it's made no difference, and every year it's gotten worse. So when we looked at, again, improving quality of life for the greatest number of people, and I'll go back to my indicators real quick so I can, sorry, there we go. Particularly the population that's under 18 per square mile, so vulnerable populations and populations that hopefully, if we invest in these communities, will stay and grow out from there, that we might actually have a chance with we estimated it was over $850 million to deal with all of the blight over 5 years. We had $42 million at the time. So if we have $42 million, we got to start somewhere. And I think, yes, I'm sure that people living. Oh, there we go. Okay. Let me just give a little Detroit orientation. Largely hollowed out. This is our central business district in Midtown where a lot of resources have gone over the last couple of decades and things are starting to change. But this here is largely hollowed out. I was having a great conversation, I think it was, yesterday. So this neighborhood right here is adjacent to the old Poletown plant where it was a large manufacturing center. Tens of thousands of people densely concentrated in there. Tens of thousands. Now fewer than 6,000 residents left in that area. And the sparseness, the distance between residents in that area means that they don't show up on this map, because if we invest a whole bunch of money in tearing down houses or intervening in blight in that neighborhood in particular, we are impacting quality of life for maybe 5 people if we do a couple of block area, right? But if we can focus our efforts here, here, and here, we are impacting quality of life for hundreds of people, thousands of people, who then may be able to turn around and have some hope, some faith that if they put some dollars into their own home, into their own neighborhood, if they participate in their community garden, in their local CDC, that they can have some faith that those dollars aren't just being flushed down the toilet, right? Those dollars in their time, because that is critical. So, that neighborhood, it's unfortunate, but when you only have $42 million and you have $1 billion problem, we got to start somewhere. I think you were next, and I don't want to I don't want to mess up your timeline, Katie. All right.
Two-part question. For some of the data that was given to you that you didn't collect, how did you handle data ownership of that data? And then the second part of that is what happened when you got an opens records request of either that data or integrated data?
Okay, so the question is around the data. How did we deal with ownership of the data, and then how do we deal with records requests around the data that maybe hadn't come out before? So, great question. Ownership, because we were working with Dan Gilbert and he likes to move fast, no one settled it before we got started, which was an interesting situation. We didn't know who owned the project. Is Motor City Mapping a project, or is it the data set? Is there an entity that will own it? The Blight Task Force was just a group that had come together. They weren't a legal entity, right? So it was challenging and took us an extra couple of months to get the data out on the Open Data Portal, because we're sitting there going, who do we ask? And who are we going to make upset if we publish the data that we all collectively collected? Who's going to be upset if we publish it? And so we had to kind of do it backwards, right? We should have planned for that in advance, but they had a crazy timeline. For open records requests, we haven't dealt with it yet.
And so who owns the data now? Has that ownership been given to you, or do the actual providers still own it?
Yeah, so the question is, who owns the data now? I think about it less in terms of ownership and more in terms of stewardship. So D3 continues to steward the database that was created. We do quarterly updates on several of the data sets that fed into it. And the parcel survey piece of that, which is only one small component, funny enough, but it was probably the biggest effort, that is more in the community's hands at this point, and we're trying to encourage city employees. I'm working with the City of Detroit's Chief Information Officer, trying to encourage her to deploy the tool across city employees who are out in the field all the time and probably have the greatest incentive at this point to keep the survey data up to date. Yeah. I'm going to have to go to the side of the room.
And I think we're going to have to go to one more
more.
question.
All right.
Yeah.
So my question is, I didn't see much integration with criminal justice data. Is that something that you looked for and didn't get, or is that something you were going to get and you're hoping to integrate, or what's the plan?
All right, so integration with criminal justice data, did it happen? What's the plan? You may have noticed from the intro that I care a lot about neighborhood dynamics and crime together, right? So what's funny is when we were out in the field on this project and getting ready to release the data set, the City of Detroit launched its own open data portal. That was a sea change for Detroit. One of the very first data sets they put up there was criminal offenses, record level criminal offense data that are coming out. There are a couple of caveats around that, but it was a major change, right? So the research that I've done in the past has shown that it's actually vacant homes and not the abandoned, disinvested, falling to pieces ones that are more correlated with crime, at least in Detroit, right? Because I had record level data before for criminal offenses, and I had that beautiful 09 data set. So I was able to do a lot of research where we want to make sure that we're intervening in areas where it's recently vacant, not necessarily the falling to pieces ones or vacant, open, and dangerous ones. In terms of the report that came out, the big, here's the Motor City Mapping report and plan and all of that, it didn't factor in so much because it was really hard to get crime data at that exact moment when it was being released, but we have an opportunity going forward to integrate that.
Excellent. Thank you so much.